Adam Davenport was the man everyone envied, an empire worth millions, a penthouse in the heart of Manhattan, and a shining reputation for philanthropic endeavors. But the moment he spotted the pregnant woman begging on the sidewalk, her dirt-streaked cheeks and trembling hands outstretched, everything in his life shifted. Because that frail figure was none other than Sophie Davenport, the wife he'd abandoned with little explanation. A single flicker of recognition passed between them before he turned his back with a cold, dismissive laugh. What Adam never expected was to see Sophie's face on the news that very night, exposing his deepest, darkest secrets. Adam Davenport was born into privilege, raised in an imposing estate just outside Boston, Massachusetts. The estate, officially titled Redwood Manor, had once hosted presidents, foreign dignitaries, and even a young Bill Gates during a private charity auction. The lavishness and aristocratic traditions ingrained in Adam a sense of inherited superiority. By the time Adam was in his mid-20s, he had taken that entitlement into the business world, investing aggressively in real estate and tech startups. His father, Charles Davenport, boasted a name that opened every boardroom door. Yet Adam prided himself on claiming he was a self-made millionaire. His mother, Catherine Davenport, was a socialite known for her impeccable charity work with the Red Cross. She was admired for her extravagant galas that raised thousands for healthcare initiatives in impoverished countries. Catherine often hovered in the background, an elegant figure overshadowed by her husband's formidable presence. Whenever she saw Adam adopting a harsh business tactic or making risky deals, she'd quietly remind him that wealth can disappear as easily as it's gained. But for Adam, those reminders were inconsequential. The rise and fall of markets, he believed, were simply part of the grand design that always favored the strong. In Manhattan, Adam quickly became known not just as wealthy, but as flamboyantly so. He purchased the entire top floor of a glass tower overlooking Central Park, complete with a rooftop garden so spectacular that Architectural Digest featured it on its cover. Journalists who interviewed him called him a charming maverick. Investors described him as a cold, calculating gambler. Yet no one disputed that everything he touched turned to gold. Having once secured a meeting with Elon Musk at a SpaceX facility in Hawthorne, Adam was rumored to be seeking a stake in futuristic technologies that would change the face of human habitation on Mars. He was unstoppable, or so everyone thought. Into this world of steel and glass stepped Sophie Parker, a woman so unlike the society women Adam usually dated that his colleagues were stunned when he announced their engagement. Sophie, a painter and part-time art teacher, met Adam at a charity event hosted by Catherine. Sophie's modest upbringing in rural Pennsylvania, with a single mother who worked 2 jobs, made her sensitive to the plight of those less fortunate. She and Adam were from different worlds, yet they connected in a magical moment over their love for art. Sophie thought she had found a caring, visionary man behind the fierce business facade. In the beginning, Adam's zest for life enamored Sophie. He took her on private helicopter rides to see the New York skyline at sunset, introduced her to A-list celebrities at fundraisers, and showered her with priceless gifts: a rare painting from 19th century Paris, a diamond necklace rumored to have belonged to Grace Kelly. Sophie was swept off her feet. The press fawned over the dazzling couple, the self-made real estate mogul and the graceful artist. Catherine Davenport publicly welcomed Sophie with open arms, seeing in her a gentle soul who might soften her son's edges. But as the wedding neared, cracks formed in the glittering veil. Adam's business expansions consumed him. He snapped at Sophie for what he called her naive worldview. She worried about the environmental impact of a new resort Adam planned to build on a once pristine beach, but he dismissed her concerns. When she offered to donate portions of her personal savings to children's art programs, Adam scoffed at the waste of funds better used for stock investments. The first real fight came during a dinner party with potential investors, including a visiting Japanese billionaire. Sophie gently confronted him in front of the guests about unethical land grabs in underprivileged neighborhoods. Adam's face darkened, and that night he unleashed a fury Sophie never saw coming. Still, they married. For Sophie, love was about compromise and faith in the goodness that she still saw buried inside Adam. She told herself they were from different worlds, but mutual love could bridge the gap. Then, just a few months later, she found out she was pregnant. The pregnancy made her anxious because Adam had repeatedly claimed he wasn't ready for children. However, Sophie convinced herself that once he saw their baby on an ultrasound, once he held that tiny life in his arms, his paternal instincts would overcome his corporate ambitions. So she told him the news during a quiet evening at home, expecting the joy she'd heard about from friends. Instead, Adam's reaction was frighteningly cold. He stared at her speechless for several seconds, as if calculating how this development would affect his life, his finances, and his public image. Then he simply walked away, leaving Sophie in tears. From that point on, their conversations were clipped and distant. Adam seldom stayed at the penthouse. He claimed to be busy traveling on business. When Sophie insisted on a proper discussion, he responded with anger, accusing her of trapping him into fatherhood. That night, after a vicious argument, Adam left and did not return for weeks. By the time Sophie hit her 4th month of pregnancy, she barely saw him. Credit cards were cancelled. The staff was instructed to ignore her requests. Bills began to pile up. Sophie was forced to rely on her meager personal savings while living in the luxurious penthouse, an absurd contradiction that eroded her dignity every day. It was the day Adam found out about an emerging scandal regarding questionable loans and bribes in one of his overseas ventures that he decided to vanish entirely. He believed Sophie's pregnancy was a nuisance. Without telling her, he severed her access to his money, effectively leaving her with no financial support. Then he quietly began filing for divorce behind the scenes, wanting to erase Sophie from his life as if she'd never existed. He told only a few close associates he trusted about his plan. Most believed he was heartless, but business is business, they said. If Sophie was causing him trouble, best to let her go. Sophie did not find out about the divorce papers until she was served at her gynecologist's office just after hearing her baby's heartbeat. That was the day her world collapsed. Without money, without a lawyer, with nowhere to go, she retreated to a cramped motel on the outskirts of Manhattan. Nights were spent sobbing her hands protectively over her belly, mourning a husband who refused to be a father. Yet Sophie was not about to give up. She loved that unborn child more than anything. It was in that bleak motel room that a plan started to take shape, a plan to survive, to reveal the truth, or perhaps to confront Adam in a very public manner. She gathered the few scraps she knew of Adam's business deals. Over the years, he had let slip tidbits about questionable partnerships and hush-money payments. Sophie had once overheard her husband's furious phone call about certain property acquisitions that did not seem legal. She knew enough to suspect Adam's empire was built on more than entrepreneurial genius. But for now, she simply had to survive. Adam Davenport stared at his reflection in the tinted windows of a skyscraper in downtown Manhattan. His slick raven black hair and impeccably tailored suit complemented his chiseled features. People buzzed around him, assistants, junior executives, lawyers. He was in the process of launching a new real estate project, Mercury Towers, a $500 million construction dream set to redefine the city's skyline and reaffirm his status as a real estate tycoon. His phone rang. The caller ID read Benjamin Rhodes, an old friend from Harvard, now a top financial analyst at Morgan Stanley. Adam braced himself. Benjamin's calls meant either big opportunities or urgent warnings. Today, it was neither. Benjamin had seen an article hinting that some of Adam's overseas deals, specifically in Eastern Europe, were under scrutiny. Adam brushed it off as just rumors. After the call, Adam's personal lawyer, Frank Helms, approached him with a sealed envelope. "We've served Sophie," he said quietly. Adam felt a pang, but he disguised it with a nod. He looked around at the bustling cityscape. He was the king here. Sophie was just an inconvenient memory, a mistake he was systematically erasing. "Good," he replied, eyes narrowed. Later that evening, Adam found himself at a private charity gala in the Hamptons, rubbing shoulders with wealthy art collectors and philanthropic icons. Catherine Davenport was there, addressing a small group of society women about her latest efforts to help children in Africa. Adam avoided his mother's gaze, knowing she disapproved of how he had handled Sophie. Catherine had tried to reach out to him about her daughter-in-law, but he'd ignored her calls. In the crowd, Adam spotted a few celebrities. George Clooney, who was charming a table with anecdotes from his humanitarian work. Oprah Winfrey greeting fans with warmth. Adam had once proudly escorted Sophie through such gatherings, introducing her as his future wife. The memory stung him unexpectedly like a misfired nerve. He quickly diverted his thoughts to the glamorous blonde, draped on his arm, a socialite named Victoria Stratton. She giggled flirtatiously at everything he said, oblivious to his introspection. Throughout the evening, Adam circulated with a champagne flute in hand, forging alliances and forming new business leads. And yet every so often, his mind flickered to Sophie. Why couldn't she just disappear gracefully? Why had she forced him to be the bad guy? It wasn't that Adam had no conscience. He had simply learned to bury it. As a child, Charles Davenport had berated him for showing weakness, whether it was empathy for a bullied classmate or tears over a lost pet. Davenports are not crybabies, Adam, his father, would snap. Over time, Adam had grown a callous layer of self-protection around his heart, equating vulnerability with failure. Now, perched at the pinnacle of success, he reflected on the irony to maintain that success he had to shed any connection to Sophie. She threatened his carefully curated image, and if her pregnancy became widely known, it might complicate matters with potential investors. Adam rationalized that he was saving them both heartbreak by ending the marriage swiftly. Toward the end of the evening, he retreated to a private lounge upstairs in the mansion hosting the gala. Here, wealthy donors discussed sensitive topics away from paparazzi and eavesdroppers. The host, a flamboyant art collector named Gregory Holt, was enthralled by Adam's rumored new investments in advanced AI. Holt introduced Adam to a prospective partner from Silicon Valley. Deals were offered, alliances formed. Adam's phone buzzed again, another text from Benjamin Rhodes. He decided to ignore it. He was here to expand his empire, to forge bigger plans for Mercury Towers. The messages could wait. What Adam did not know was that while he sipped champagne among the elite, Sophie had run out of money in her motel room. She was waiting for a phone call from a local non-profit regarding temporary housing for homeless, pregnant women, and that call was about to lead her down a heartbreaking path. Sophie Parker-Davenport was 7 months pregnant, her belly gently rounded beneath a threadbare sweater. She sat on the edge of a squeaking motel bed, the neon light from the sign outside casting a sickly glow. The phone, clutched in her hand, was her only lifeline to a possible future. With what little she had left in her savings, she'd managed to pay the motel owner through the end of the week. After that, she had no idea where she would go. At last, her phone rang. A volunteer from Harbour House, a non-profit offering temporary shelter for vulnerable pregnant women, introduced herself as Lucy Carter. Her voice was kind, but apologetic. They had no vacancies. They were already over capacity, and the waiting list stretched beyond reason. Sophie tried to explain her situation, that her husband had effectively abandoned her, leaving her destitute. But the volunteer had heard countless variations of the same story. She promised to keep Sophie in mind, but made no guarantees. Tears welled up in Sophie's eyes, but she swallowed them down. She thought of the unborn child she now named Lily. She touched her belly as if Lily could sense her struggle. Sophie's artwork, once her pride and joy, was stuffed into a single portfolio, leaning against a chair in the corner. She considered selling her paintings for whatever she could get, but the local pawn shops offered peanuts, and the one gallery she reached out to had no interest in unknown artists. That night, with her motel reservation nearly up, Sophie made a desperate choice. She would have to beg. She wrapped herself in the warmest coat she owned, took the little cash left for bus fare, and headed for a busy intersection near Columbus Circle, holding a small sign, "Homeless and Pregnant." Anything helps. Sophie stood among the city's bustling crowds. People averted their eyes, dropped spare change, or muttered words of pity. She felt a humbling sense of shame, but also a fierce determination. She must provide for Lily, no matter the cost to her pride. Unbeknownst to Sophie, the tabloids and social media had started whispering about Adam's missing wife. A gossip columnist from Page 6 had run a small piece, "Where in the World is Mrs. Davenport?" But official sources from Adam's camp were tight-lipped. The rumor mill spun about extramarital affairs, hidden pregnancies, hush money. Still, it was overshadowed by bigger headlines about global politics and Hollywood breakups. Sophie's plight, for the moment, remained largely unnoticed, until by a twist of fate, one passing stranger recognized her from a feature in a society magazine, a long-forgotten photo capturing the newlyweds at a gala. The stranger snapped a picture on a smartphone. It showed Sophie's clearly pregnant figure, the cardboard sign, and the disbelief etched on her face. That single photograph was posted to Twitter with the tag #Davenport_scandal, and it began circulating slowly, like a small ember, waiting to ignite into a blaze. When Sophie returned to the motel, exhausted and heartbroken, she found her keycard no longer worked. The owner, tired of waiting for payment, had locked her out. She sank to the pavement, hugging her coat tight as the frigid wind cut through her. 2 hours later, a local policeman found her shivering behind the building. Kindly, he escorted her to a women's shelter in a rough part of town. Sophie spent the night on a cot in a communal room, tears silently streaming as other homeless women tried to offer her comfort. In those quiet hours, Sophie recalled details of Adam's shady dealings. She remembered hushed phone calls about bribes to local zoning boards, properties that were suspiciously undervalued lawyers who specialized in silencing journalists. For months, she'd convinced herself she couldn't possibly stand up to Adam's power. But now, the stakes were life and death for her and her baby. Sophie resolved to gather every last piece of information she had to find someone who would listen. Because if there was a chance she could not only survive, but also expose Adam's corruption, she owed that to herself and to her child. The day after Sophie's humiliating attempt at begging the photograph of her in the street, had gained mild traction online. A local Channel 7 newscaster, Maria Thompson, was searching for a human interest story. Maria was known for her sympathetic coverage of underrepresented communities, a stance that earned her both admirers and critics in the media world. She stumbled upon the tweet featuring Sophie and recognized the surname Davenport. Intrigued, she called her producer, pitched the story, pregnant woman on the street, possibly linked to the famous Davenport family. The producer dismissed it as unsubstantiated, but Maria decided to dig deeper. Meanwhile, Sophie stood outside a grocery store trying to pick up a few items with the few dollars she'd collected the previous day. She felt eyes on her suspicion from passers-by who wondered why a woman in designer shoes, her only remaining comfortable footwear, stood collecting coins. She wanted to scream that these shoes were a relic from a life that had betrayed her, that she had no desire to flaunt anything anymore. She left with a small bag of groceries, canned soup, a loaf of bread, and some apples. Returning to the women's shelter, Sophie faced more heartbreak. They too were over capacity. She could only stay a few more days before she had to make room for another incoming resident. Just as Sophie felt another wave of despair creeping in, a staff member tapped her shoulder. "You have a visitor," the woman said. Stepping into a small office, Sophie was met by a warm, professionally dressed woman with a press badge, Maria Thompson. The reporter introduced herself, gently stating she had come across Sophie's photograph. With empathy shining in her eyes, Maria offered to buy Sophie a coffee and hear her story if she felt comfortable sharing. Initially, defensive, Sophie clung protectively to her secrets. She was keenly aware that the press could twist her circumstances. But Maria's genuine concern wore down her guard. Over steaming cups of coffee, Sophie recounted the broad strokes, how she and Adam met, the pregnancy, the sudden abandonment, the cancellation of her credit cards, and now her homelessness. She left out details of Adam's potentially criminal business dealings, unsure if she could trust Maria fully. Still, Maria was shaken. This was more than a typical high-society marital dispute. Maria wanted to run the piece on the evening news, but she needed proof to satisfy her skeptical producer. She asked Sophie if she had any documents, text messages, or anything that would corroborate her story about Adam's abandonment. Sophie hesitated, then admitted she had saved some text messages on her old phone. She also had the copy of the divorce papers that arrived unexpectedly. Maria recognized a major news story was brewing. A wealthy man, with a carefully curated public image, had thrown his pregnant wife to the curb. This wasn't just a gossip piece. It was a social injustice story, highlighting how even a woman married into money could be left in ruin. Maria offered to help Sophie find a short-term solution for shelter, promising to keep her identity somewhat protected until the full story was verified. Sophie hesitated. Did she truly want to stir up a media firestorm? On the other hand, exposing Adam might be her only leverage to get any form of support for her child. She nodded, tears threatening to spill over as she accepted Maria's business card. That night, Sophie rummaged through the worn duffel bag containing all her worldly possessions. She found the phone with Adam's old texts. Reading them was like peeling back the scab on a fresh wound. In one exchange, Adam dismissed her concerns about unethical real estate deals in Eastern Europe, telling her, "Don't stick your nose where it doesn't belong, Sophie." Another text read, "Stop texting me about money. It's your responsibility now. Find a job or figure it out." Her heart pounded with equal parts devastation and resolve. She recalled an instance when Adam had inadvertently opened a private email in front of her. She saw mention of offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, large sums transferred from suspicious sources. Could that be the final piece of the puzzle, the reason Adam so ruthlessly wanted her gone? Perhaps. She only had fragments, but they might be enough to launch an investigation. In the early hours, as she lay on the thin mattress of the shelter cot, Sophie whispered her baby's name, again Lily. She vowed to shield Lily from the cruelty of this world. And if that meant partnering with Maria Thompson to reveal Adam's double life, so be it. Meanwhile, in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, Adam Davenport sifted through the daily avalanche of emails. His father Charles had left a voicemail earlier chastising him for ignoring important family matters. Catherine Davenport, too, had texted him about coming home for a conversation. Adam scowled, irritated that his parents still meddled in his affairs. He walked onto his rooftop garden, his sanctuary. The city lights stretched below an infinite tapestry of wealth and ambition. Adam prided himself on achieving so much without needing to rely exclusively on his father's fortune. But now, with a new wave of scrutiny on his overseas dealings, he felt the weight of it pressing down. In recent weeks, he noticed a change in how people addressed him, an uneasy tension. Investors asked more questions than usual, lawyers demanded more clarifications, and that old friend from Harvard, Benjamin Rhodes, had grown persistent with warnings about an impending expose by an investigative journalist in Eastern Europe. Late that night, he dreamt of Sophie. He saw her in a tattered coat, her eyes hollow. She reached out to him with trembling fingers. He turned to walk away, but in that split second, something in him wanted to hold her, protect her. Then the dream shifted, and Sophie disappeared. He woke in a cold sweat, heart pounding. He brushed it off as residual guilt. Guilt was a frivolous luxury he had no time for, yet he couldn't shake the sense that he was careening toward a cliff. That very morning, a string of notifications lit up his phone. Adam rarely checked social media, but one particular message from a friend read, "Dude, is this your wife?" A link followed. It led to a trending post about the pregnant woman on the street. The angle was still more rumor than confirmed fact, but the photograph was unmistakable. Sophie disheveled, wearing the same coat Adam had bought her on a trip to Paris. Adam felt his stomach lurch. The narrative forming online was that a powerful millionaire had discarded his pregnant wife, forcing her into homelessness. Most comments were outraged, denouncing him as a monster. Some speculated Sophie was faking it for a reality TV scandal. The rage and speculation spread like wildfire through small corners of the internet. He tossed his phone aside, cursing under his breath. His first instinct was to call his PR team to snuff out the story. But the real question haunted him. Had Sophie truly resorted to begging on the streets? It seemed surreal, but the photographic evidence spoke volumes. For a fleeting moment, Adam recalled the softness in Sophie's voice when they first met, how she'd carefully restore the brightness in old paintings. Why had she not called him? Then he remembered. He was the one who cut her off, cancelled her phone plan, and fired the staff who had shown her an ounce of sympathy. Still, he was determined to maintain control. He called Frank Helms, his lawyer, instructing him to handle the situation. Frank suggested a quick payment to Sophie in exchange for signing a confidentiality agreement, standard procedure to bury scandal. Adam agreed, stating coldly, "Whatever it takes to shut her up." But Frank hesitated. "This is different," he muttered. "She's pregnant, and there's a photo evidence that she's in desperate straits. A hush payment might not be enough. If the public turns on you, we need a more delicate approach." Adam slammed his fist on the desk. "I don't do delicate," he growled. "Fix this." Later that day, Catherine Davenport paid an unexpected visit to Adam's penthouse. She walked through the door with a regal presence but carried an anxious air. Without greeting, she demanded to know the truth about Sophie. Adam tried to brush her off, spouting lines about Sophie being unstable, but Catherine wasn't swayed. She reminded him that he had a responsibility moral, if not legal, to his wife and unborn child. Their argument escalated, Catherine's voice trembling with emotion as she threatened to go public herself if Adam refused to help Sophie. "I'd rather destroy your father's business ties than see you abandon a pregnant woman, let alone your wife," she warned, tears glistening in her eyes. Adam felt cornered, outraged, but also strangely trapped by the moral force of his mother's words. He growled something unintelligible, telling her not to meddle. Catherine left, but her impact lingered. By sunset, Adam decided to gather more information about Sophie. He pulled out old messages, rummaged through the penthouse for any sign of her. In the bedroom, he found a small painting Sophie had done of him once he was leaning against a balcony railing, gazing into the distance. She'd captured the tension in his posture, the lines on his brow. It was disturbingly accurate. He tossed it aside, feeling too many unwelcome emotions. While Adam wrestled with his conscience across town, Sophie was meeting, once again, with Maria Thompson. This time, they were in the Channel 7 news studio after hours. Maria had asked Sophie to come in through a side entrance to avoid prying eyes. Seated in a dimly lit office, Sophie handed over her phone, showing Maria the texts from Adam. She also produced the divorce papers. Maria's face went grim as she read Adam's terse, cold messages. The cruelty was plain. She also scrolled through financial statements from Sophie's marriage, noticing abrupt drops in Sophie's account after Adam cancelled her cards. "We can make a powerful story out of this," Maria began. "But are you prepared for the backlash? Adam Davenport is not the type of man to go down easily." Sophie felt a surge of determination. "He's counting on me to remain silent," she said, "but I won't." Privately, Maria's journalistic instincts told her there was more to Adam's empire. A tip from an investigative reporter named Rachel Levin had hinted at major money laundering in Adam's overseas developments. If Sophie could confirm even a fraction of that, the story would balloon from a domestic scandal to an international expose. Meanwhile, a producer at Channel 7 who overheard Maria's conversation recognized the potential ratings bonanza. He leaked the story's details to a friend at a larger network, hinting that Channel 7 had a bombshell about the Davenport dynasty. Word reached a tabloid editor at the New York Post, who dispatched reporters to stake out Adam's penthouse. The rumor was that Adam's pregnant wife was homeless, and Adam was facing serious allegations of illegal financial dealings. Sophie, unaware of the swirl of media interest, was preparing to give a short on-camera interview for Channel 7. Maria set up a small, discreet studio with low-key lighting, hoping to protect Sophie's identity until they officially broke the story. But just as the camera rolled, an alert popped up on Maria's phone. A national news outlet had seized on the photograph of Sophie begging in the streets, labeling the story, "Millionaire's wife, forced to beg, pregnant and alone." It went viral within the hour. The world suddenly knew Sophie's face, and Adam's name was trending on every major platform. Hate messages, calls for boycotting Adam's businesses, and outraged commentary flooded social media. In the midst of this frenzy, Sophie sat under the studio lights, tears glinting. She spoke about her life with Adam, her fears, her love for the child growing inside her. She wasn't vindictive, just desperate. She wanted the father of her baby to be present to care for them, or at least not leave them penniless. The interview concluded, and Maria gently guided Sophie out of the studio's back entrance. Cameras flashed in the alleyway. Paparazzi had arrived. Shouts echoed. "Sophie, is it true your husband abandoned you? Does Adam Davenport know you're homeless?" Sophie shielded her face with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the sudden exposure. From a nearby unmarked sedan, a private investigator hired by Adam took photographs, noting Sophie's movements. He reported back to Frank Helms, who in turn reported to Adam that the story was out in the open. That night, mainstream news channels picked up the story. Adam Davenport's phone blew up with calls from outraged shareholders, old friends demanding explanations, and major networks requesting interviews. At first, Adam considered denying everything, but the evidence was too glaring. Instead, he turned to damage control mode. He arranged a meeting with top PR specialists, people who had handled crises for politicians and Hollywood celebrities. Their advice was unanimous: get ahead of it. Show remorse. Spin the narrative that Sophie refused your help. Adam refused to say he was sorry. Instead, he planned to accuse Sophie of mental instability, claiming she refused all forms of financial assistance out of pride. However, hidden away in a locked safe in Adam's office were documents that told a different story. They showed wire transfers to shell companies, suspicious expansions in countries notorious for corruption, and details of payoffs to local officials. If revealed, these could destroy Adam's empire faster than any domestic scandal. The media coverage about Sophie was the tip of the iceberg. If a true investigation began, it might unearth everything he had fought to hide. Channel 7 announced an exclusive segment with Sophie Parker-Davenport scheduled for prime time. Millions of viewers tuned in, eager for the sensational scandal. Sporting a borrowed outfit that Maria had given her, Sophie appeared on screen, looking nervous yet resolute. She recounted her story, meeting Adam, the whirlwind romance, her pregnancy, the sudden abandonment, and the heartbreak of begging for money on the street. Adam watched from his penthouse. Anger flared as Sophie described how he cut her off financially. But something else surfaced, a pang of regret, when she recounted the good memories, the shared dreams in the early days of their relationship. He watched her eyes glisten under the studio lights. The interview reached its peak when Sophie dropped hints about Adam's questionable business activities. She mentioned overhearing phone calls with large sums of money being transferred offshore, suspicious legal documents, and intimidation tactics against local communities. Maria had coaxed her to reveal these details. The broadcast concluded with Sophie's emotional plea, "I never wanted a fight. I just want my baby to have a chance." Social media exploded. Half the public condemned Adam as a heartless villain. The other half questioned whether Sophie was making up stories for sympathy. Adam's PR team scrambled to craft a response. The very next day, Adam appeared on a competitor's morning show. He looked composed, his handsome features arranged in a mask of calm sincerity. In a measured tone, he alleged that Sophie suffered from severe anxiety and paranoia, that she refused every offer of counseling and financial support, and that he had no knowledge of any shady business dealings. He expressed deep regret that she had to resort to begging, but insinuated she was unwell. The hosts pressed him on the divorce and the sudden cut-off of funds. Adam skillfully dodged, emphasizing that it was a complex personal issue best resolved privately. For a moment, it seemed Adam's polished persona might win over public opinion. But within hours, contradictory evidence poured in. Leaked text messages showed him explicitly refusing to give Sophie money or even let her stay in the penthouse. Bank statements proving the cessation of her credit cards circulated on social media. The public was outraged, calling him out for lying on national television. Sophie, meanwhile, received a surprise call from Rachel Levin, the investigative reporter who had been pursuing Adam's corporate malfeasance. Rachel had decades of experience exposing corrupt officials and corporate barons. She had even contributed to a major Pulitzer-winning investigation. Over a crackling phone line, Rachel congratulated Sophie on her courage for speaking out and hinted that if Sophie was willing to talk, Rachel could connect her to international sources who were digging into Adam's businesses. Torn Sophie wondered if she could trust another journalist. But the potential to dismantle Adam's corrupt empire and possibly secure a future for her child compelled her to listen. "I'll meet you," she said quietly. In a quiet cafe in Midtown, Rachel Levin placed a battered manila folder on the table before Sophie. Inside were scanned documents, bank ledgers, and correspondences that pointed to a web of offshore accounts linked to Adam Davenport. Sophie's eyes widened as she recognized the names of shell companies Adam had vaguely referenced before. Rachel explained that she had contacts abroad who confirmed that several real estate development projects under Adam's banner were suspected fronts for money laundering. Politicians were bribed to fast-track zoning approvals. Local communities were intimidated to sell their land at a fraction of its worth. The situation was even darker than Sophie had imagined. "This is bigger than a domestic scandal," Rachel said, her voice low. "If you come forward with what you know, it could blow the lid on international corruption. But it'll also put a target on your back." Sophie felt Lily flutter in her womb, as if sensing her mother's turmoil. She set her trembling hands on her belly. "How does this help me and my baby?" she asked, her voice shaking. Rachel was honest. "If we can prove Adam is involved in criminal activities, you might have grounds to claim a portion of his assets, or at least force him to settle in your favor. More importantly, it's about justice. You won't have to live in fear. We can offer you some protection by making sure your story is out in the open. So if anything happens, it'd be obvious who's responsible." Still, the risk was high. Adam was powerful and vindictive. But Sophie found herself recalling the times she pleaded with him to consider the ethical repercussions of his deals, how he mocked her idealism. She remembered the humiliating moment on the sidewalk, her swollen belly heavy with life, while the father of her child turned away with a dismissive laugh. Those memories steeled her resolve. She nodded. "I'll do it," she said, the finality of her words echoing in her mind. That evening, Rachel set up a clandestine meeting with some of her international colleagues, investigative journalists, who had been trailing Adam's business empire for over a year. Sophie provided them with details, overheard phone calls, suspicious documents she had glimpsed, fragments of code words Adam used for certain offshore wire transfers. Cross-referencing these details with their existing files, the journalists confirmed that it all fit into a larger puzzle. Over the next week, Sophie found herself under the protective wing of a safe house arranged by a women's advocacy group. Donations from sympathetic viewers of her Channel 7 interview started to trickle in. More importantly, lawyers who specialized in pro bono work for women in crisis stepped forward to offer legal assistance. A small glimmer of hope shone in her life. And then came the phone call that changed everything. Channel 7 wanted to do a follow-up story featuring evidence of Adam's financial misdeeds. Sophie's face would be front and center. Maria Thompson and Rachel Levin planned to join forces for a collaborative expose. In a single night, they would reveal not only Adam's abandonment of Sophie, but also the labyrinth of corruption behind his fortune. Adam Davenport felt the walls closing in. He had never been in such a vulnerable position. His father refused to speak to him, calling his actions a disgrace. Shareholders in Mercury Towers demanded an emergency board meeting. His PR team threatened to quit if he didn't come clean about the finances they suspected were illegal. Everywhere he turned, he was cornered by the fallout of Sophie's revelations. Late one night, he sank into a leather chair in his office, swirling a glass of expensive scotch. The city lights below provided no comfort. His phone rang incessantly. Calls from journalists, from old acquaintances who suddenly wanted nothing to do with him, and from a few unscrupulous fixers offering to silence his accusers for a price. Adam realized he had to act quickly. He couldn't simply pay Sophie off anymore. The story was too big, involving multiple journalists. He considered fleeing the country to one of his offshore havens, but that would be an admission of guilt, fueling more media speculation. Desperate he had one last card to play, he would personally confront Sophie, attempt to manipulate her into retracting her statements. If that failed, he could threaten the journalists with defamation lawsuits or bribe them. He wasn't above anything at this point. Through back channels, Adam learned the approximate location of Sophie's safe house. He deployed his private investigator to track her down, ignoring his lawyer's warnings about harassment or intimidation. Adam believed he could charm Sophie into compliance or scare her into it. Simultaneously, the Channel 7 special was set to air in 3 days. Maria and Rachel worked around the clock, verifying sources, cross-checking documents, anticipating any legal maneuver Adam might throw at them. They prepared a bulletproof piece of journalism that was poised to detonate Adam's empire. Sophie, weary and anxious, stayed mostly indoors at the safe house. She tried to distract herself by painting with borrowed supplies, creating small canvases, capturing her emotional turmoil. Each brushstroke was raw, with the pain of betrayal, the desperation of survival, and the cautious hope for a better life for her baby. The night before the broadcast, Sophie had trouble sleeping. She stared at the flickering streetlight outside the window, thinking of Adam, how once he had held her hand on a private beach in the Bahamas, promising her the world. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she thought about all that had transpired, how his love had withered into cruelty. Despite everything, a part of her still yearned for the man he pretended to be in their early days. She placed her hand on her belly, feeling Lily's gentle kicks. "I'm doing this for us," she whispered. The day of the broadcast arrived. Tension buzzed through the air like an electrical storm. Channel 7 teased the segment throughout the day. Tonight, an exclusive investigation into the Davenport empire, secret documents, insider testimony, and a wife's harrowing story. Social media crackled with speculation, hashtags trending nationally. In the late afternoon, as Sophie prepared to leave the safe house for the station, a knock sounded at the door. She froze. Maria Thompson was scheduled to pick her up, but Sophie's phone hadn't rung to announce her arrival. Warily, she peered through the peephole, and her heart stopped. Adam Davenport stood there, face-drawn, eyes shadowed. He wore a tailored suit, but it hung looser on his frame, as if the stress had drained him. Sophie's hand trembled as she opened the door a crack. "What do you want?" she asked, fear tightening her throat. Adam slipped inside before she could stop him. For a moment, neither spoke. The tension was palpable. Sophie noticed Adam's eyes flick to her swollen belly, a flicker of something regret-sorrow passing over his features. "I've come to talk," he began. His voice was calm, but a slight tremor betrayed his desperation. He tried to approach her, but she stepped back, arms protectively over her belly. "Talk now," she choked out, a humorless laugh. "You left me in the street, Adam. You humiliated me. And now, when your empire is in jeopardy, you want to talk." Adam's jaw clenched. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. Look, I'll give you anything you want, money, a new home. Just don't go through with this broadcast. Tell them you misunderstood. I'll settle with you, set up trust funds, everything. Sophie's eyes flashed. Trust funds? You think that's all it takes to fix what you've done? You cut me off when I needed you most. You laughed in my face when I was begging in the street. Now, you're only here because you're afraid of losing everything. My baby isn't a bargaining chip. Adam's facade cracked. Sophie, He paused, struggling with words he never had to say before. I'm sorry. She didn't respond. Her gaze remained unwavering. He tried again. If you do this, everything I've built, everything I've worked for. Sophie's voice quivered with anger. What about everything I've lost? The nights I slept on the street, the humiliation, the terror of not knowing where my next meal would come from. You did that to me, Adam. Adam's eyes rimmed with a sheen of tears he refused to let fall. He was cornered, and he knew it. Fine, if that's how you want it, he said quietly. You'll ruin me. You'll ruin us both. Sophie's lower lip trembled, but she stood firm. I don't want to ruin anyone. I just want the truth to come out. I want to protect my child from you, from the world you tried to drag me into. The tension reached a crescendo. Adam's phone buzzed. He glanced down to see message after message, reporters, lawyers, PR people screaming for him to make a statement. He turned to Sophie one last time. Don't go tonight, I'm begging you. But Sophie had made her choice. With a slow shake of her head, she pointed to the door. You need to leave. When Adam hesitated, a staff member from the safe house, alerted to the disturbance, stepped in. Adam stared at Sophie, his face a mosaic of anger, fear, and an emotion that might have been genuine sorrow. Finally, he left, without another word. Sophie sank into a chair, her entire body trembling. The baby stirred within her, an urgent reminder of why she had to see this through. That night, every major network tried to undermine Channel 7's exclusive story. But Maria Thompson and Rachel Levin had the scoop. The program began at 8:00 p.m. sharp, millions of viewers across the nation tuning in. They opened with Sophie's emotional recounting of her abandonment, followed by the bulletproof dossier of offshore accounts, bribery, and money laundering. Rachel Levin presented interviews with foreign officials who confirmed Davenport's manipulations. Documents were shown, cross-verified by forensic accountants. It was a staggering expose. Social media erupted in real time, condemning Adam and praising Sophie's bravery. By 9:00 p.m., corporate boards associated with Adam's ventures started issuing statements, distancing themselves from him. Share prices in Davenport-related companies plummeted overnight. The name Adam Davenport became synonymous with greed, deception, and cruelty. From his penthouse, Adam watched in stunned silence. As the damning evidence piled up, he realized there was no escape. Lawyers called one after another, telling him that the FBI was likely to investigate based on the new revelations. Some even suggested packing a bag and leaving the country immediately. But it was too late. Every move he made was under scrutiny. Meanwhile, Sophie sat in a modest hotel room, provided by the network's staff members, around her, offering support. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she watched the final segment. Despite the overwhelming public support, she felt no triumph, only a heavy sadness. This was the man she once loved, and this was how their story ended. In the days and weeks that followed, Adam Davenport's empire unraveled. Investigations opened on multiple fronts, freezing his assets. International authorities cooperated with U.S. law enforcement to track illegal transactions. Adam's once loyal associates turned on him, striking plea bargains and testifying against him. The divorce proceedings became moot once Adam was indicted on charges of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Sophie's lawyers filed for spousal support and child support, but the tangled legal battles meant it would take time before she saw any money. Still, donations from supporters and the help of non-profit groups ensured she no longer worried about where she would sleep at night. Catherine Davenport emerged as Sophie's unexpected ally. Publicly disowning Adam's actions, Catherine apologized to Sophie and set up a trust for her unborn grandchild, vowing to stand by them. Though Sophie remained cautious, she recognized Catherine was sincere. It was a bittersweet bridge to a family legacy that had almost destroyed her. When the trial date loomed, Adam was offered a plea deal, reduced prison time, in exchange for full disclosure of his networks and partners. He gave in. In a final act of desperation, he wrote a letter to Sophie from his holding cell. He apologized for everything, acknowledging that he had destroyed the best thing in his life through greed and arrogance. He asked her to at least consider allowing him visitation rights once the baby was born. Sophie's hands shook as she read the letter. She cried not from longing, but from sadness at how far they'd fallen. She did not respond. In the months after the sentencing, Sophie gave birth to Lily in a peaceful hospital setting arranged by the same advocacy group that initially took her in. Lily arrived healthy, her bright eyes looking up at her mother as if to promise a fresh start. Sophie felt a rush of indescribable love and relief. She vowed Lily would never know the desperation she once faced. Days blended into quiet nights of feeding and lullabies. Even though Sophie knew Adam was behind bars, she felt a certain closure. When news broke that Adam had begun his prison term, Sophie experienced a swirl of emotions: grief, relief, hope, and a lingering sorrow for what might have been. For the media, Sophie's story became an emblem of resilience. She signed a small deal to have her paintings showcased at a local gallery, ironically becoming more recognized in the art community because of the scandal. She used part of her new income to support shelters for homeless pregnant women, determined to extend the helping hand that she once needed. In the end, the story of Adam and Sophie Davenport was a cautionary tale: how the thirst for power and wealth can corrode a soul, and how love, when twisted by greed, can unravel into tragedy. Yet it was also a testament to the inner strength of a woman who refused to be silenced, who stood up for herself and her child against impossible odds. Sophie's story reminds us that even in the darkest moments, courage can spark a transformation that changes lives, her own and countless others. Through public exposure, she found not only justice, but a renewed sense of purpose, using her voice to help those who need it most. Her tale is a vivid warning against the seductive power of greed and the fragility of conscience, once ambition overshadows compassion. Now, dear listeners, if Sophie's journey moved you, if it inspired you to stand for truth and resilience, please show your support. Like this video to boost its reach, share it to spread this vital message, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that reveal the hidden strengths within us all. Together, let's continue to shed light on injustice and champion those who fight for hope and redemption in a world that too often forgets them.